Okay, so we have with us Coach Rob of the Cards. He is on our coaches committee, and he will be returning next year for season 2 on the coaches committee. In real life, Coach Rob works as an attorney and has a real good mind with Madden, understands the game, and uh, in particular some of the inner workings of the game. So he's become someone that as commish I rely on for some of his thoughts. And one of the things that he was given a task to do this season was to help identify problems with the game, just like the assistant commish Mike and I do, Mike of the Vikings. And we always are looking for things that need to be fixed. Like right now we know we have a bug with the salary cap, and we also had, I don't know if I want to call it a cheat, but we had something going on with some of our coaches where there was some position changing going on, and then they were signing them to contracts under different positions that were, much more cost effective, and then changing them back to the position that they were supposed to be playing. And so when we found coaches doing this, of course, we notified them that that wasn't okay and we corrected it in the files. But that's a lot of editing for the commish to do, and it would be better to have a rule and some consequences. And, we don't have a ton of rules, so we can ask coaches to go to our rules page and read it and expect that they should be able to handle that stuff. So Coach Rob, tell us the basics about this new rule that you proposed to the coaching committee that got passed. Tell us about what it is and why we're doing it.
All right, so we created a new rule that limits some of the position changes that you can do with your Madden character. We actually originally had a rule that was a little bit more liberal and less restrictive than this, where you could move your offensive line to any offensive line position, any LB to any LB position. Tight ends could move to the fullback, and halfbacks could move to the fullback, etc. So we already had a rule in place. It just wasn't complete enough to stop a little bit of the more abusive Madden mechanics that I think the developers didn't really think through when they were designing this part of the game.
No, come on.
Right. So we tried to come up with a way that we could best address being able to change someone's position to artificially change their OVR to allow you to sign them for a lot cheaper, and also to change people's positions on the fly between weeks in order to give them quick progressions or to progress different stats. And what we came up with as when we weighed all the different options that we had was we were going to restrict people on the players on the offensive guard and offensive tackle position being switched to centers, people from the offensive linebacker position being switched to middle linebackers, and cornerbacks and safeties otherwise being moved around, and defensive ends taking over for defensive tackles. There are still a lot of position changes that you can do. Okay, so you can still move defensive ends to OLB and OLB to DE, but only right when you get them. You can still move cornerbacks and safeties and defensive ends and defensive tackles, but only right when you get them.
Right, so not at contract time.
Right, not at contract time, only on acquisition. So either when you first draft them or when you first trade for them.
Okay, so let me ask you a question before we get too far down the line on this, and I like where we're going with this, but give me an example. It doesn't have to be an exact number crunch, but so you said no tackles or guards to center. Whereabout was the discount there? Do you remember?
So you would probably, and it again depends largely on your OVR, because the higher you get in the 90s, contracts inflate really quickly. So let's say you had a really big stud at offensive tackle that when you knocked him down to center may only have been reduced in OVR by 3 or 4. That could realistically have become a $10 million, $20 million contract reduction over the course of a 4 or 5 year deal.
That's pretty significant.
Right, and it becomes more significant the better the player is. Obviously, if you're going to have like a player with a 70 over become a 75, the contract at that point is already so weak that it doesn't really matter. But at that point, those characters are going to be, or those players are so far back in the pecking order that we didn't really view that, I think, as something that we were too concerned about being able to restrict coaches from doing. And there are some downsides to the system. If you do sign let's say a middle linebacker from someone else's system, and maybe you could have swapped them to an outside linebacker to give them that that bonus that they get to their progression by being a scheme fit, you're not going to be able to do that anymore. And that's, I think, really the only true downside to this plan. You won't be able to get certain players swapped for scheme progression fits anymore, but you can still play them at the offensive linebacker position. You still can put players that you can't swap their native positions into those spots using your roster, using your coaching substitutions, and using your depth chart. So all those options are still available to you from a coaching perspective. This purely affects the management side of this. So, for example, one of the things that you could have done, and this is, the real impetus for it, is I was testing out re-signing Le'Veon Bell because I got Le'Veon Bell on a trade early in the season, and I wanted to see what would happen if I simmed out to the offseason. Could I sign him? What would it be like? And it turned out that if I simmed out to the offseason, I could re-sign Le'Veon Bell. If I signed him as a halfback, he wanted, like $40 million.
Okay.
If he was a fullback, I think it came down to $2.5 million a year, which was like a $10 million contract.
Pretty significant.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And you can still play your halfbacks in that fullback slot. You just can't swap them over to that native position anymore in order to get those gamey sort of cheesy benefits that are not really by design. Because let's say you're in the actual NFL and you have Le'Veon Bell on your team and you say you wanted to play some fullback duty. Well, first of all, he's going to be like, no, screw you, I'm sitting out. But let's assume he wasn't Le'Veon Bell and he was more of a team player. This is maybe like a one of those players types guys. He's like, coach, I'm going to help out the team however I can. I know I'm a great halfback, but I'll play that fullback for you. He'll do that for you, but he's not going to take a massive pay cut because he knows, hey, I'm one of the best halfbacks in the league.
Yeah, play me where you want.
Right.
I might not like my carries, but you're going to still pay me.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so let me ask you this then. Obviously, this is something we'll be watching, and if we need to make changes, through season, as we work through season 2. I know for me, I would really like the league to have the freedom to move their players in the old pattern that we started the league off with. Being able to play linebackers at any linebacker spot, being able to play DBs at any DB spot, being able to play the O-line at any O-line spot. Was the feeling that you got from the coaches committee that we might be looking at different ways to make these types of in-game changes possible again? Or is this just closed and a done deal in your mind based on the feedback you got from the coaches committee?
No, the coaches committee is always willing to review things and make changes on the fly, especially if there is, a major issue with the rule. I mean, maybe you spot something that I didn't. If so, feel free to PM me. I'll talk it out with you. Maybe I think that there's something that you weren't thinking of, and maybe I'll be able to address your concern at that point. Maybe you can honestly come up with something that I didn't think of, and that would be a good way of moving forward. I mean, I'm not going to shut someone down just because it's not my idea. That's not what coaches committee is about. We're trying to make the league better for everyone. So if you feel like you have some positive feedback, PMing one of the coaches committee's members is a great way of allowing us to talk about it. I mean, there may not be like a formalized, sit down where everyone's going to just, air out all their ideas on Discord, and then, we're going to become a ravenous mob of everyone, wanting to do their own thing, but it will be discussed. There's never been something that someone hasn't brought to me that I haven't addressed in some way or another. So if you do have a real concern, feel free to PM me and we'll bring it up. And yeah, we will be making the changes. Right now, I do think this is in a pretty good spot. I do think that you still retain almost all of the flexibility as a coach that you might have had otherwise. And as I said before, I do recognize that there is some flexibility that's been removed from a GM position to be able to get those progression bonuses. But the ease that this is going to allow us to retain the ability to move our players around without us having to put in a post and have some committee review it every time we want to swap our player is a lot better than having to have that individualized review process. So you guys all have the ability now to just make all of these changes on the fly, and it will very, very, very rarely stop you from doing something that would otherwise be legitimate.
Well, that's ultimately why I went ahead and gave my vote to do this, because you can still play the guys anywhere you want that's within our allowed position. Right. If Madden allows you to move a corner to safety, you can do that in game, in depth chart.
Right.
You just, there's just
And
some limits. You just now can't edit a guy and make him a center. You can move him to center in the depth chart if he's a tackle, but he's still on your roster. He's going to be listed as a tackle.
And that's
So,
something that Madden
yeah.
19 does so much better than Madden 08 is it recognizes that, there's now these things called edge rushers. It's not like a defensive end assigned anymore or an outside linebacker. These are now hybrid positions. Players are moving around. That's why the game will let you slot in your cornerbacks into the slot cornerback position or a safety in the slot cornerback position. And you can even do it based on individual formations. So we don't need to have the position swapping the same way we needed it back in Madden 08 in order to do the things that coaches are actually doing in the NFL. But
Right.
if there is going to be a change, and if there is people listening to this, they feel like this was a little bit too restrictive, what we may propose in the future is we may allow an individual case by case process to review players that, like, let's say that you have a middle linebacker and you're not going to switch him to the outside linebacker position to get a discount on him. Maybe you've already signed him to a 7-year long contract, and then you want to make the case that this is going to be a non-abusive swap. Maybe we can have individual reviews for something like that. The same way the trade committee reviews trades, that could be something reasonable if there's enough coaches in the league that feel like that's necessary.
Uh-huh.
But
Right.
if there's only like 1 or 2 people that want to do it, then it may not be worth the time to set up a committee to handle that change
Right.
if it's not going to be a problem. So if you guys do feel that this rule is restricting you in any way, feel free to reach out and we'll discuss trying to improve it in order to meet your concerns.
Yeah. Well, the teams like to switch schemes too, and I'll give you an example with the Dolphins. Kiko Alonso, his first year or maybe 2 with the Dolphins, he was a middle linebacker, and then they moved him to the outside backer in a 4-3. Well, they may be running a lot more 3-4 now, so he's going to move back to middle linebacker. But on my roster, he's still a right outside linebacker. So there we go. If I was going to run 3-4 a whole bunch, I'd like to be able to move him to middle linebacker. But now, see, that would be a problem. So I could do it in the depth chart, but I couldn't do it in, per se in the game. So those are types of things I think people are going to, they're going to start drafting for specific defenses, things like that. And that'll help, but also they're going to have some players, let's face it, the players on our roster right now, they're beefed up. All of us have better rosters right now than we're probably going to have 2-3 seasons from now if progression doesn't go well for us. And so, teams might be looking, at some of those things. One thing I'd say to the league and everyone, else is that we don't know everything about Madden 2019 right now. And even though we have a dev in the league, and even though we have people running the league that have a lot of experience running Madden, this is a different breed of Madden as a game, and there are things about it that are uniquely different, and how players are going to progress, how players, like right now, we don't even know if we're going to see, with the way we edited our rosters to make all of the players' progression normal, are the ones that did really well now going to jump up to superstar?
Yes.
Is it going to be an automatic thing
Well,
that switches over? And I know people have simmed through leagues, but if you're not playing through a league, it might be different, and I've heard different things about that. But I will say this, even at normal, my players have progressed more than
yeah.
well. I'm more than happy with a normal progression league-wide. I don't feel like we need any players progressing in superstar. We will be back with part 3 of the Commish Show in just a minute.